The Royal Theatre was overflowing that evening. It wasn't just a concert. It was a concert of the year. The world-famous pop icon, Selena Vos, was performing live, and the city's elite had gathered in gowns and tuxedos. Cameras flashed, fans screamed, and security kept the common crowd far away from the stage. But in the very back row sat someone who didn't belong. Her name was Myra, a simple woman who worked as a florist in a small street shop. She hadn't bought a ticket. She had been given one by a kind customer who couldn't attend. Myra had never been to such a glamorous event before. She sat quietly, clutching her purse, eyes wide with awe as she watched Selena command the stage. Halfway through the show, Selena paused between songs. She loved interaction, but more than that, she loved control. Her eyes scanned the audience, sparkling with mischief. And then she noticed Myra. The pop star tilted her head, a smile playing on her lips. "You," Selena said into the microphone, pointing straight at Myra. The spotlight swung across the crowd and landed on the startled florist. People turned, whispering. Myra shrank in her seat. "Yes, you, with a plain dress. Don't be shy. Come up here." Myra shook her head, but the audience started clapping, cheering, encouraging. Some laughed, already sensing Selena's game. The star was famous for toying with strangers, turning them into a joke for the crowd. Security approached and gently urged Myra forward. She stumbled, almost tripping on her own shoes, as the spotlight followed her to the glittering stage. Selena handed her the microphone, eyes glinting. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced dramatically, "our new opening act. Let's see what hidden talent she has." The audience roared with laughter. Some pulled out their phones to record. Myra stood frozen, staring at a sea of eyes, the dazzling lights, the star beside her. Her lips trembled. Selena leaned closer, smirking. "Go on. Sing for us. Or are you just good at smelling flowers?" The crowd laughed again. Myra's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct told her to run. But deep inside, something whispered, "Don't give her the satisfaction." She raised the microphone to her lips, and for the first time in her life, Myra sang in front of an audience. The microphone felt heavier than a brick in Myra's trembling hands. The audience stayed, their laughter still echoing. Selena stood beside her, one manicured hand on her hip, her eyes sharp with amusement. She wanted a show, but only to humiliate. The pianist looked confused. He glanced at Selena, waiting for instructions. Selena smirked. "Play something simple. Let's see if our guest star can keep up." A soft melody filled the air, casual and mocking. The crowd leaned forward, eager to witness the disaster. Myra's throat was dry. She closed her eyes, blocking out the blinding lights, the laughter, the weight of judgment pressing on her. In her mind, she wasn't in the grand theater anymore. She was back in her tiny flower shop, humming softly while arranging roses, or singing to herself while watering lilies. And then she opened her mouth. The first note was fragile, almost a whisper. Some people in the audience chuckled, shaking their heads. Selena tilted her head, her smile widening. But then Myra's voice rose. The second note was clearer, stronger. It rang out, echoing through the theater with surprising purity. Heads lifted. Murmurs spread. Phones stopped recording jokes and started filming something else. By the third note, the laughter was gone. Her voice wasn't trained like a professional's, but it carried something rarer, soul. Every word trembled with truth. Every sound touched something raw inside the listeners. Selena's smile faltered. The crowd, which had expected a spectacle of humiliation, now sat frozen. Some leaned forward in disbelief. Others exchanged stunned glances. Myra's plain dress and shy demeanor melted away. In that moment, she didn't look like a florist. She looked like she belonged on that stage. Selena's jaw tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had dragged Myra up here to mock her, not to watch her steal the spotlight. But the audience was no longer looking at Selena. All eyes were on Myra. The final note of her verse rang out, lingering in the theater like a spell no one wanted to break. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, electric, as if the entire hall was holding its breath. And then, somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. For a heartbeat, the theater stood frozen in silence. Myra clutched the microphone, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She thought she had failed, that her voice wasn't enough. And then, clap, it came from the back row. Firm, clear, unexpected. Heads turned. A second clap joined in. Then a third. Within seconds, applause spread like wildfire, rolling through the audience until the entire theater thundered with cheers. People rose from their seats, whistling, shouting, clapping so hard the floor seemed to shake. Myra's eyes widened. She had never been applauded before in her life. Her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from disbelief. Selina's face froze in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped forward, trying to retake control of the moment. Thank you, she said loudly, pretending the applause was for her. Wasn't that adorable? But the crowd wasn't looking at Selina. They were looking at Myra. Cameras zoomed in on her flushed cheeks, her tear-bright eyes, her ordinary dress that suddenly seemed extraordinary. Encore, someone shouted. Sing again, another voice echoed. The audience chanted, louder and louder. Sing, sing, sing. Selina's hand gripped the microphone stand so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was her stage, her show, her spotlight. And yet a simple woman, a florist nobody knew, had stolen it from her with a single song. Myra looked at Selina, unsure. Should she stop? Should she hand back the microphone? But the crowd's voices drowned out her doubts. They weren't laughing anymore. They were begging. They wanted her. Selina leaned in close, her whisper sharp enough to cut glass. Don't push your luck. But when Myra turned her face back toward the crowd, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Belief. The audience believed in her, even when she didn't fully believe in herself. And for the first time that night, Myra smiled. She lifted the microphone again. The pianist, sensing the shift, adjusted his fingers on the keys and waited. The whole went dead silent once more. And Myra began to sing again, this time, not with fear, but with fire. He stepped closer, their faces inches apart, and belted his next verse directly at her, trying to overwhelm. Elena staggered back a step, but then something inside her broke free. Her voice surged upward, untrained, raw, but glowing with fire. It didn't clash with his. It outshone it. The pianist, caught up in the moment, leaned fully into the keys, giving her space to soar. Gasps erupted from the crowd. People stood from their seats, some cheering, some simply frozen with awe. Phones were everywhere now, flashes popping like lightning. Victor's eyes darkened. For the first time in his career, he felt threatened. Elena held a microphone with both hands, her chest rising and falling, her voice wrapping around the hole like a tide pulling everyone into her world. By the time she reached the last note of the verse, the theater wasn't Victor's anymore. It was hers, and everyone knew it. The final note of Elena's verse hung in the air like a fragile glass, so delicate, yet so powerful, that no one dared breathe until it faded. Then, thunderous applause. The theater erupted, people rising to their feet, clapping and cheering for the simple woman in the gray dress. Elena stood frozen, stunned by the reaction, her heart pounding wildly. But Victor Kane didn't clap. He stood rigid, his jaw tight, his smile forced. Inside, rage boiled. How could she, a nobody, dragged from the back row, steal his stage? Victor raised his hand for silence, and the obedient crowd quieted. He forced a laugh, smooth and sharp. Not bad at all. But ladies and gentlemen, surely you know that one lucky verse doesn't make a singer. Some of the crowd murmured. Others frowned. They could sense the venom hiding behind his charm. Victor turned to Elena, lowering his voice so only she and the front rows could hear. Enjoy the applause, little bird. It won't last. He snapped his fingers at the pianist. Change the song. Something harder. Something only a real singer can handle. The pianist hesitated, glancing at Elena sympathetically. But Victor's glare left no room for disobedience. The tempo shifted. A powerful, complex ballad filled the hall. High notes, sharp transitions, the kind of song even professionals feared. Victor seized the opening, his voice soaring with mastery. Every run was flawless, every high note struck with precision. The crowd applauded, yet the enthusiasm wasn't as loud as before. Some were watching Elena nervously, wondering if she could survive this trap. Elena gripped the microphone, her pulse hammering. The melody was terrifying, twisting in ways she wasn't trained to follow. For a second, fear threatened to choke her. Victor leaned in, whispering with a cool grin, "Full now, and they'll forget you by tomorrow." The spotlight burned hot on her skin. The audience waited. Elena closed her eyes again, shutting out Victor, the crowd, even the piano. She thought of her parents, of nights singing softly to herself to drown loneliness, of every moment music had been her only companion. And then she sang. The first note trembled, but instead of breaking, it bent, twisting beautifully into the melody. She didn't follow the song perfectly. She made it her own. The pianist's eyes widened, then smiled. He shifted his playing subtly to match her flow, supporting her. Gasps rippled through the hall. She wasn't just surviving the trap. She was transforming it. Victor's face drained of color. This wasn't possible. The crowd began cheering mid-song, clapping, shouting Elena's name. For the first time in his career, Victor Kane felt the stage slipping from his hands. The theater was alive with electricity. Elena's voice, raw, trembling yet fearless, had begun to wrap itself around every soul in the room. People weren't just listening anymore. They were feeling. Victor Kane, however, was not about to surrender his crown. His eyes blazed as he grabbed the second microphone from the stand. Without waiting for the pianist, he launched into a powerful harmony, his voice booming, polished, perfect. He strode across the stage like a conqueror reclaiming his land. The crowd roared, half for him, half for her. The whole was no longer united. It was divided. Victor pushed harder, leaping effortlessly into high notes, his every run dripping with superiority. He leaned close to Elena, almost shouting into her face through the music, daring her to collapse. But Elena didn't back down. Instead, she turned her body slightly away from him, closed her eyes, and let her voice soar, not louder, not technically superior, but true. Her tone cracked once, then steadied, filling the silence with an honesty so piercing that it cut deeper than perfection ever could. The audience gasped, then erupted into wild applause. Some even shouted, "Elena! Elena!" Victor's jaw clenched. Sweat beaded at his temple. For the first time, the mask of effortless control slipped. He wasn't performing for them anymore. He was fighting. He raised his hand to the orchestra pit, signaling for a dramatic key change. The pianist hesitated, but Victor snapped his fingers sharply. The music swelled higher, faster, more dangerous. It was the kind of shift designed to break even seasoned singers. Elena's heart pounded. She could feel it, a trap. The melody twisted upward like a staircase into the clouds, impossibly steep. One mistake, one crack, and she'd tumble. Victor sang first, hitting every note with laser precision. He smirked mid-song, believing the game was his again. Then it was Elena's turn. The crowd held its breath. Phones rose higher, cameras zooming in. The entire theater seemed to lean toward her, waiting. She lifted her chin, inhaled, and sang. The note burst out of her like a flame, shaky at first, then growing, swelling, lifting the room with it. She didn't just climb the impossible staircase. She built a new one, her own path, bending the melody into something uniquely hers. By the time she reached the peak, her voice broke into a haunting, soul-stirring cry that silenced even Victor. The audience leapt to their feet. Cheers thundered through the hall, stomping, clapping, screaming her name. Victor stood frozen, microphone limp in his hand, staring at her as if the ground beneath him had vanished. For the first time in his life, Victor Kane wasn't the star of the stage. The applause for Elena thundered through the crystal hall, echoing off the glittering walls and chandeliers. The crowd was on its feet, shouting her name, waving their hands, phones recording every moment. It was a scene Victor Kane had never imagined, not for himself, and certainly not for nobody. Victor stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then rage surged through him like wildfire. He forced a smile, cold and sharp, and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but dripping with threat, "you've seen her talent. Impressive for a beginner. But now, let's raise the stakes." The pianist shifted nervously, sensing something dangerous in the air. Victor pointed directly at Elena. You think this is a fair game? That raw talent is enough to beat experience. Elena's pulse raced, but she didn't back down. She had already survived humiliation, fear, and now sheer intimidation. Victor raised his hand and snapped his fingers at the orchestra pit. The music erupted, louder, faster, more complex than anything they had played before. High-pitched crescendos, unexpected shifts, impossible intervals. The sheet music alone would intimidate even a professional. Victor's grin widened. This was his ultimate move. He would trap her in his masterpiece of chaos. He launched into the song first. His voice soared, hitting every high note, every run precise, flawless, almost mechanical in its perfection. The crowd, initially mesmerized, started to cheer, partly for him, partly anticipating Elena's inevitable collapse. Elena gripped the microphone. The room spun around her, the lights a blinding halo. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to give up. But she remembered the cheers, the hope in the audience's eyes, and the small, steady voice inside her that refused to break. She inhaled deeply and sang. Her voice, raw and trembling, bent the impossible notes into something beautiful, something entirely hers. The melody that was supposed to trap her, to crush her, she owned. The audience gasped. Phones and cameras captured every miraculous moment. Cheers and cries erupted mid-song as they witnessed a singer unpolished yet unmatched in emotion, daring to rise against a titan. Victor's expression darkened. He tried again, hitting higher, faster, sharper, every note perfect. Yet the harder he pushed, the more Elena's authenticity shone. The contrast was undeniable. Technical brilliance versus human truth. By the middle of the performance, the audience was chanting her name. Elena, Elena, Elena. Victor Kane, the legendary, feared, untouchable star, felt his empire crumble note by note. And Elena? She was no longer the timid florist from the back row. She was a force the entire hall could feel, undeniable, unstoppable, and just getting started. The music swelled to a fever pitch. Elena's voice, raw and alive, intertwined with Victor's flawless runs, creating a tension so thick it was almost tangible. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath with every note. Victor's pride burned hotter with each passing second. His golden voice, usually untouchable, now collided with something unpredictable. Elena's voice wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every tremor, every subtle quiver carried emotion his precision could never mimic. He narrowed his eyes, and for the first time, he lost control, not just of the crowd, but of the stage itself. Victor leaned close to Elena, his voice cutting through the melody. You think you can beat me? Do you hear them cheering for you? Elena's pulse raced, but she didn't falter. She met his glare with steady eyes, letting her voice rise and wrap around the impossible notes. The audience felt it. She was fearless, undaunted, alive. The applause grew even louder, drowning Victor's words. People were shouting her name, phones raised, streaming live for the world to see. The crowd wasn't just impressed. They were choosing a side. Victor slammed a hand on the microphone stand, forcing the pianist to ramp up the intensity. He tried to dominate every note, every chord, attempting to reclaim control. But Elena adapted. Her voice flowed like water, bending with the music, rising above the chaos, turning his aggression into a backdrop for her brilliance. The whole trembled with emotion. People were on their feet, some cheering, some crying, completely absorbed by the unfolding drama. The balance had shifted. Victor's smirk faltered. Panic flashed in his eyes. He had never faced anyone who could stand toe-to-toe with him and make the audience forget him. Elena's heart pounded, but fear had transformed into power. She realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She could own this stage. And at that moment, a wave of whispers spread through the hall. She's not just singing, she's commanding. Did you hear that note? Incredible. This is more than talent, it's magic. Victor Kane, the invincible superstar, finally understood. This wasn't just a duel. This was a revolution on stage. Elena took a step forward, microphone steady in her hands, eyes glinting with newfound confidence. She wasn't just surviving. She was taking over. The crowd roared louder, caught between shock, awe, and the thrill of witnessing history. Victor's fingers tightened on the microphone, jaw clenched. His empire control was slipping, fast, and Elena was just getting started. The crystal hall vibrated with anticipation. Elena and Victor stood on opposite ends of the stage, the spotlight burning hot on both of them. The pianist's fingers hovered above the keys, waiting, as if even he knew this moment would define everything. Victor Kane took a deep breath. His golden voice, sharp and commanding, rang out first. Every note was precise, every trill perfectly timed. The crowd instinctively leaned in, captivated by his mastery. But Elena wasn't intimidated. She met his gaze steadily, lifted the microphone, and let her voice flow, not to compete, but to transform the music. Her tone was softer, warmer, yet carried an unstoppable power. Every word, every note, told a story Victor could never replicate. Her story. The duel escalated. Victor's voice soared higher, faster, trying to reclaim the spotlight. He gestured dramatically, moving across the stage like a king defending his throne. Elena responded with agility and grace, her voice bending the impossible melody into something beautiful, something entirely her own. The whole shivered with emotion. Every listener was entranced. Phones and cameras recorded, capturing every heartbeat, every tremor tension. Victor's smirk faltered. Sweat beaded at his temples. No one had ever challenged him like this. The crowd's cheers for Elena grew louder with every passing second. They weren't cheering for perfection. They were cheering for heart. Frustration and desperation flashed in Victor's eyes. He hit a sequence of impossibly high notes, pushing the music to its limits, attempting to overwhelm her. But Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she rose with it, her voice soaring above, intertwining with his, not as an echo but as a force. Every note from her seemed to amplify the emotion in the room, every crack in her voice resonating more than his flawless runs. Gasps, whistles, and applause erupted. People were on their feet, unable to contain the awe. Some were crying. Some were cheering with every ounce of excitement in their lungs. Victor paused mid-note, shock flashing across his face. The realization hit him. He wasn't controlling the stage anymore. The crowd's loyalty was shifting, fast, irrevocably, and overwhelmingly toward Elena. Elena's eyes sparkled with fierce determination. This wasn't just about singing anymore. It was about proving that courage, authenticity, and heart could outshine fame, skill, and ego. And as the music swelled into a final, breathtaking crescendo, the whole held its breath, waiting to see who would claim victory. The music surged like a tidal wave. Elena and Victor faced each other on stage, two contrasting forces, raw emotion versus perfect technique, courage versus ego. The audience was on their feet, holding their breath as if the next note could change everything. Victor launched into his final, flawless run, every note hitting the crystal-clear perfection that had made him a legend. He expected awe, fear, admiration. But Elena answered with heart. Her voice trembled, cracked, and soared all at once, carrying the weight of her struggles, her dreams, and every quiet moment she had spent singing alone. The clash of their voices filled the hall like lightning striking glass. Victor's control faltered. Every note he sang perfectly now sounded hollow compared to Elena's raw, unstoppable force. The audience erupted, not politely, not in polite applause, but in a deafening, roaring storm of cheers. People were crying, shouting her name, phones flashing, every corner of the hall shaking with energy. Victor's eyes widened. The realization hit him harder than any failed note ever could. The stage was no longer his. The crown of admiration, the throne of fame. Tonight, it had shifted. Elena, breathing heavily, held the microphone steady. She didn't gloat. She simply let her final note hang in the air, trembling, beautiful, and complete. The hall went silent for a heartbeat, then exploded into the loudest, longest applause she had ever heard. Victor Kane, once untouchable, stood frozen. His empire control had crumbled, not because of talent alone, but because he had underestimated courage, authenticity, and heart. Elena smiled softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. She looked out at the audience, at the people cheering her, and for the first time, she felt the power of believing in herself. The crowd chanted, "Elena! Elena! Elena!" And that night, In the glittering crystal hall, a simple woman had shown the world that true greatness isn't about fame or perfection. It's about daring to step into the spotlight and sing from the heart. The legend of Elena began.